Hey guys, good morning. Today we are in 1 Samuel chapter 3. I don't know about where you live, but I've done a lot of complaining this week just about the cold weather. We had a big snowstorm followed by temperatures in the teens, and I don't like the cold weather because it makes me shiver. But it also reminded me of why cold weather is so important to some climates. There's a story by James Hamilton in his book called Directions, and he shares his insight about listening to God. Before refrigerators, and I'm going to read this story by the way. Before refrigerators, people used ice houses to preserve their food. Ice houses had thick walls, no windows, and a tightly fitted door. In winter, when streams and lakes were frozen, large blocks of ice were cut, hauled to the ice houses, and covered with sawdust. Often, the ice would last well into the summer. Now, one man lost a valuable watch while working in an ice house. He searched diligently for it, carefully raking through the sawdust, but didn't find it. His fellow workers also looked, but their efforts too proved futile. A small boy who heard about the fruitless search slipped into the ice house during the noon hour and soon emerged with the watch. Amazed, the man asked him how he found it. The little boy said, "Well, I closed the door. I laid down in the sawdust and kept very still. Soon I heard the watch ticking." You see, often the question is not whether God is speaking, but whether we are still enough and quiet enough to hear. You see, in the previous chapter in 1 Samuel 2, we read about Eli and his sons ministering in the temple, but not hearing from God. In fact, the temple's filled with corruption. They're stealing the sacrifices of the people. They're sleeping with the women at the temple, and everybody knows about it. And Eli has refused to take action. But in 1 Samuel 3, we're introduced to a young man who will hear from God, and his name is Samuel. And Samuel will obey God and listen to him, unlike the elders that he's serving with. And if you have your Bibles, we'll start here with verse 1. Now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord. This is the third time this phrase is used. It's used previously in chapter 2, verse 11 and 2, verse 18. He ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no widespread revelation. The Jewish historian Josephus says that Samuel was 12 years old. Other scholars say that he was between 12 and 17 years old. And it says the word of the Lord was rare. You see, it's not that God wasn't speaking, because in the previous chapter, God had spoken to the man of God to rebuke Eli. Instead, the problem was that there was no one listening. This was a spiritually dark period in the time of Israel. You see, the lesson for you and I is this: God will speak as long as people's hearts are willing to listen. And you'll see in this chapter the supposed spiritual leaders of Israel that they're not listening. But Samuel, this young teenager, is listening and ready to obey.